Hi and welcome to Hospitality Huddles. I'm Scot Turner and each episode we'll be uncovering the industry's biggest challenges and serving up the solutions to help overcome them. We're bringing together some of the best thought leaders in the industry and finding some of the most creative minds shaping the future of hospitality from all around the world. They're going to share insights tackling the pain points operators just like you face every day. Hospitality Huddles is more than a podcast, it's a community of passionate individuals who appreciate the art and science of hospitality and want to help answer the difficult questions. If you like the show, one of the best ways to support us is to hit that subscribe button and leave a review. It's only going to take a couple of minutes and it really does make the difference. So let's get on with today's episode, and all that's left to say is welcome to Hospitality Huddles, where hospitality meets conversation, one huddle at a time. Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Hospitality Huddles, and today we're talking about project management, which given Auden Hospitality is working on multiple projects at one time, I'm really interested to try and learn some tips and tricks from today's guests. So Brendan, thank you very much for joining us on the show today.
Thanks for having me. Super excited to talk about it.
So Brendan, we always start the show with asking people, what does hospitality mean to you? So I'd really love to hear what you have to say on this one.
I guess it's a feeling. It's walking into a place, feeling warm, feeling welcomed, and just knowing that you don't have to worry, because the last thing you want is stress, right? And if somebody brings you into their home or somebody brings you into their restaurant, it's really just about having that experience, and that's why I'm in hospitality, and I think that's why a lot of people are in hospitality, because it means a lot to be able to give that to people and have that as a just a service. You know, I think people talk about service as a process, but service is really just something we do for people because it helps them, makes them happy, and it makes us happy.
So, yeah, that's a really good answer. I there's some of that resonates quite strongly with me as well. So love that answer. So Brendan, for those people who might not know you, give us a little run over your background and what you're currently doing now with JKS.
So I've been in hospitality my entire working life. I guess I'm getting close to 15, 17 years, something like that. And came to London about 12 years ago as a waiter, and now I am head of projects for JKS Restaurants. What I do with JKS is essentially manage the program of internal projects, and that could be tech, that could be events, more like localized internal events, initiatives. And also I help with the new openings. So I work with the commercial director in terms of the layouts, making sure that our construction project manager is getting everything done on time. So I kind of straddle the two, ops and also kind of commercial in a way. Yeah, in a nutshell, that's what I do.
And you've made that sound really simple, and I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that. I've been someone who's restaurant openings and things, but for those people who might not know JKS are, because there's some people listening to the show in the US and Middle East and things, tell us more about JKS so people can understand exactly what you're looking after when you make it sound so simple.
That's a complicated question to answer. So JKS Restaurants are a collection of restaurants. We partner with amazing chefs to help bring brands to life. So we have a lot of partners within the business and a lot of different brands. So everything from, you may have heard of Kitchen Table, Lyle's, Gymkhana, Hoppers, and I could go on and on. We've got about 25 restaurants in London right now. And yeah, everything from a fine casual to 40-minute on the table all the way to 2 Michelin star restaurants.
Yeah, it really is some amazing restaurants. Some I come in and out of London into King's Cross, so Bow and Hoppers are always my go-to when I need a bite when I'm running a bit late. It's two amazing restaurants. So yeah, anyone who's listening to this who might not have checked out JKS, you should definitely check out their stuff. It's amazing, and the food halls as well that that sit there, which are pretty cool as well, right?
I don't remember how many cuisines we've got, but we've got quite a few. So if someone is looking for something in London, I'm sure we can accommodate.
For sure, that's definitely for sure. So, listen, Brendan, we're here today to talk about project management, and it's a huge subject, isn't it? Project management, because especially in hospitality, it goes from, as you just mentioned, everything from opening a restaurant all the way down to implementing new initiatives and keeping things on track. If you had to kind of summarize what project management means, how would you define it?
Oof. A project is an assembly of tasks towards an end goal. I think a lot of the time people forget that projects have ends. It does end. And that's quite important because otherwise you get project creep. And what happens is things just keep going on and on. And then you end up spending too much resource, or you end up spending too much of your time on something that should have had a more clear brief or scope. So projects are very much, a set of tasks towards an end goal, is what I would call it.
Yeah, I mean, a great way to put it. There's something you just touched on there, actually, which was every project comes to an end, and we experience this doing what we do at Auden, where you do the project, so say we do a restaurant opening or a concept, and we get to that point where we've done the opening, we've maybe done 10 days after, and it gets to that point of going, right, let's sit down with the operator now, and here's the keys, here's the manuals, now it's your baby. How do you do that how do you work towards that handover process where you are? Because I guess there's people listening to this who might be the operators thinking, are the project guys handing over in the right way to me?
Yeah, I guess there's two elements, right? There's the project, and then there's business as usual.
Yeah.
And when you get to the BAU, it's really about making sure that you've handed everything over properly. And it's not a process of here's the keys and off we go. It's a constant engagement. So a project doesn't end the day that the key is handed over or the tech is implemented. It's generally probably maybe a month down the line, 2 to 3 months down the line, with constant check-ins to make sure that it's a successful project. There's a lot of, and as part of that as well, it's doing kind of a reconciliation of your own processes at the end and saying, what did we do well? What didn't we do well? What can we do better next time? Because if you are an operator who's opening a project, or if you are or if you're an operator asking somebody to do a project for you, there needs to be an understanding that it's a symbiosis, and they both need to work together. They can't just end abruptly. It needs to be done holistically and organically. Like you said, you'll have a 10-day check-in afterwards, and then you'll probably have quite a few emails back and forth about the concepts that you guys are opening. You'll offer post support, and whether that's considered a different project or whether that is part of the project, it's just making sure that the scope is there for it as well. So if you are getting a third party to do something, make sure that you put in there and that you talk about what happens when it finishes. What are we doing? Like, do you expect us to be fully trained and be able to do everything? Do you expect us to be running with it? Will we be able to check in with you every quarter? That was a bit of a long-winded answer, I think, but I'm just trying to pull all these different examples together because there's just so much that can go into.
No, you're absolutely right, and I think it's one of those, isn't it, where every project that I've ever worked on has always needed iterating after what you would deem as go live. So the project I was telling you about, I'm going there on Sunday. We're going to review the sales mix with the hotel manager and the restaurant team. We're going to make sure the processes that we put in still work operationally and workflow wise. Now they've had kind of 3 or 4 weeks to bed in, and you're absolutely right. That bit afterwards, which is that now we've been the one who's led the project. We've implemented the project. Now it's your turn to take the hands on the wheel. But how can we stay there just to make sure that there's no slip ups and we can help you kind of catch anything that might go wrong? And I'm a big believer in when you do that after projects, it's about speed. Don't sit on things too long because you've got an ego that what you decided hasn't worked. Like, let's change, let's do it, because fundamentally, it's the operator that's going to suffer if you sit on things too long, isn't it?
And I had similar thought. I used to do a bit of consultancy as well and open some restaurants in hotels generally. Um, and that was always the challenge, which is everybody's on board, but then when the reality happens, things need to change quickly because you essentially doing everything in a bubble, and then you open it up to the real world, and things start to happen that you weren't expecting.
Yeah, that's true. So let's talk actually about change management, because it's really important, isn't it, to any project that you, and I had this conversation with a coach yesterday actually, who was talking about, when you start a project, how can you get the key stakeholders on board? How do you find out how that project is going to help them, or what's the outcome, and then how you take them on the journey with it? Can you talk us about how you do that with your role? Because especially with tech implementation, for example, one of the things I've seen inhibit tech success is people don't buy into the reason you're using it.
Yeah, with tech, I think the biggest issue is adoption generally. And I find the reason people don't adopt, apart from the fact that people don't like change, and that's pretty well documented, they're just not sold on why there's value for them to do it. And it's a very much a communication piece, I think, change management. It's about at the very beginning, before you even start putting any milestones or any tasks together, it's saying, what's our vision? Why are we doing this? How do we communicate it to people? And who are the key stakeholders we need to get on board? If you can do that at the very beginning of a project and say, we need to talk to these GMs, we need to talk to these people who are like maybe 5 years plus in the business, so they have a lot of say within the teams. Do some meetings with them, get them involved in the projects. All these technically don't push milestones forward, but what they do is they push change forward. People feel involved. People start to understand why we're doing things. And the vision might be a long-term vision. It could be that we're starting 2 or 3 systems, and the end goal is not to just have the system. The end goal is to have the integrated systems together. So communicate that. Tell people we're doing this for a bigger goal, which is to make your lives a lot easier.
Mm.
And I think as well, when looking at new tech, one important element to think about is who are we trying to help? And at the end of the day, you have to think who's the most important person in our business. And everybody's important, but who runs the business? It's the GMs, right?
Mm.
They are the ones who are on the floor, taking care of the teams and taking care of the guests. So you need to look at it from that viewpoint and make sure you've got a vision that fits in that. Because if you can convince the GMs that it's good and that it's going to help them, then it goes down and up, which is quite important.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I was speaking to a guy from the US called Jeremy Julian, actually at the start of the week, and we were talking about change and in particular tech implementation, and he said that he goes into projects with what he calls an impact filter, and he looks at what the impact of each of that system is to each individual person that sits in the task force team. And then he creates a Bible out of it, which is what does success look like to you? And from that, he then uses that as the go-to every time that something is happening with the project. It's like, what is that success measurement? And he keeps going back to it all the time. And I think that's really key, isn't it, in terms of getting those GMs in, understanding what's really going to change the business for them, and then going back to that every time to go, okay, you said X to us. This has been done, and this is what the thing is that helps you achieve that, isn't it? It really does help with change management.
Yeah, and I think project management and change management are 2 separate things completely that work together. And project management is very much a management process. Change management is very much a leadership process. So with change, it's about having leaders showing that things are working, that they like doing it, and bringing about that change. Project management is very much about those milestones and how do we get to the end and make sure that it's been implemented. Without both of them together, you don't get anything at the end. If you do just one, you still don't get anything really great at the end.
Yeah, yeah, and honestly, I've never heard it put like that, but it's a great way to put it because often project managers are very process driven, aren't they? And that whole task over emotion type scenario, that means they're really focused on the end goal, but who comes with them isn't necessarily their number one. And it's really key, I guess, that you're seeing like a great project manager can be really process driven, can be quite disciplined, but also needs to have that leadership and that kind of vision to help bring people with them to establish that change management, right?
Yeah, and I guess these are probably more specific to tech or internal projects than it is for a new opening, just because the new opening is probably needs to be a bit more process driven because there's a lot of things. There's probably 1,000 different lines on an Excel that need to happen, just from an ops perspective, not alone looking at the Gantt chart of the construction. Um, Therefore, there's a little less emotion in that. There's obviously the emotion involved of creating the concept and communicating that to the teams. That's very much towards the end. And people have joined usually to be part of that concept, which is helpful, unless it's obviously a rebrand. Um, the thing I've noticed across hospitality is, and I think everybody does, is that we're not the greatest at doing tech, and the adoption is not great. And maybe it's because we're taking that project management mindset that we've got for new openings and trying to shove it into what is essentially an adoption problem, which needs a bit more emotion and change management.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that at all. I can't disagree with that. I share a story quite a bit about a health and safety platform that we implemented just coming out of COVID into the business, and we thought it was going to be a game changer from us, from remote management and things like this. And we couldn't even get the thing off the ground. Couldn't even get people to log on because it just wasn't. It was just too clunky. The user experience wasn't strong enough. It was just not received. And I think a lot of that was because people just didn't believe. Maybe it was coming out at the wrong time at the pandemic and things like that. But it really taught me about how getting some of those users to go and see some of these changes and helping you sign off on that process can really help. Can really help that change process start right from the beginning.
100%, yeah. I mean, we always learn from things that don't go well, right? That's how I've learned all these things.
Yeah. But it's true though, isn't it? I mean, project management. Let's face it. So the more projects you do, the better you get. Certainly, the more new openings you do, the better you get. Your 1,000-page spreadsheet, 1,000-task spreadsheet. Maybe wasn't 1,000 tasks when you first started, and every project you add other things to it, and bits get added, and timeframes, especially at the minute with production times and things like that, timeframes get extended. So it really is about experience projects, isn't it? It's about learning, it's about making mistakes, it's about seeing where you can improve. And I guess the biggest part of that is how you can document it and not let it happen again, right? How do you go through that process with what you do, whether that's a debrief process, whether that's looking at what's gone well, what could have been improved?
So it's something that I'd like to do better myself. It's essentially, after most projects, we try to do a project retrospective, which is a half an hour sit of what did we do really well, what can we do better, what are the learning points, and the idea is get everybody in the room. Nothing is a bad answer. There's no bad thoughts to them. It's all constructive feedback and criticism, and that is a cultural change of any business to be able to say, let's take the time to actually spend half an hour to talk about it, and then maybe another hour later on to actually disseminate that information, and at the next project bring that up again and be like, this is what we did last time, let's try not to imitate that again. And it needs a lot of buy-in from a lot of people, and with us at JKS, we do things really fast and we do it really quick but really well. It's just very high octane, and sometimes that retrospective gets missed, but we've gotten a lot better now. just through everybody wanting to be the best that they can be. So everyone's like, we'll find the time. And I think that is important, just having that ethos of people wanting to be the best. Um,
Do you know, it's funny. It's funny you should say that though,
yeah.
because I when I worked in the Middle East, I worked for a business very similar, doing lots of openings, lots of initiatives. We had lots of things on the go. There, we were a management company, so we had lots of different stakeholders and owners, and that whole thing of being a high performance team that can really focus on speed can be a real superpower, because in some respects you don't necessarily need the sit down. This is what I found: we didn't need the sit down debriefs because we kind of had already done it at speed as we were going. I guess what was important for us was, as we wanted to get bigger, as we wanted to get stronger, as we wanted to get quicker, we had to make sure that that process was nailed down, so it was very easy for us to replicate. And it's something that we're working on with every project we do at Auden now. Is when we create something or we have something, we get it saved in a shared drive, so next time it's quicker. And I guess that's probably what you're finding, is that whole get tasks down and make them easily replicable, no matter whether it's a bow, a hoppers, a gymkhana, is probably something that's helping that high performance, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, essentially, it was a project. It's something that's always existed within the business, which is essentially how to open a restaurant. Um, and it's lived within certain people's heads and then been put into Excels. And it now is being formalized more, and we actually use Notion for that. Where any opening we do, we've captured everything, and that means that in terms of timings and being quick and making sure things are happening on time, it just does, because everybody has been using it for a couple of openings already. And like you said, once you're doing it, everything's at speed, because oh, that doesn't work anymore, just take it out. For the next one, when you reopen the template, it's not there anymore. Or oh, we need to add this bullet point or this task because we forgot about the, I don't know, ISO license. Well, let's put that in there, and it's done. And I think software helps with that. Like you said, a shared drive or a central knowledge hub, to be able to just always go to the same place for the information that you need, and for any updates.
I think we use Notion as well. I really like the fluidity of it, and I think how you can have all the different stakeholders coming in, and you're not paying huge licenses. So we can have contractors, designers, and when we create a project update, then and I know we were going to talk about transparency and communication, but what I've found is by using Notion and putting our clients, which you guys, I guess, is your senior leadership, putting them as part of that, which means they can go in real time and see where the project is and all the rest of it. And we've put our budget onto it as well. So everything for that project is on there. It really does make that whole communication and managing upwards, downwards, sidewards far easier, doesn't it, to have that one central place to meet?
Yeah, I mean, it's less wasted time, less miscommunication. Um, I think central source of truth is kind of a buzzword at the moment for everybody, but
Mm.
it's super invaluable, like you said, of keeping every stakeholder informed of what's going on. And the fact that most software, Notion specifically, also is mobile friendly with with an app, just means you can be on the go and just get a ping or check on a project and be updated in real time.
Yeah. And how do you then how do you use, I don't know if you use Slack or your internal comms, but is that all linked up in terms of that workflow, or is it still being developed?
Still in development. We're trying to. A couple of years back, we decided to do a bit of a cull of systems and also just start towards integration of everything. And that kind of project takes years to do, because you might be on
Yeah.
a legacy software that you're on 3-year contract across 25 sites. So you then need to start getting off it and moving on to another one. Um, and we, even before my time, there'd been a lot of work done on this, from the big systems of EPOS, and booking systems and all that. And now we're looking at the more, I think, soft systems, which, like you said, is communications, project management, and essentially making sure that whether that's 6 months from now or 18 months from now, when we start to scale up and grow more, we are in a better place because everything talks to each other and you don't need to jump too often from system to system. It's almost like being a bartender, right? When you design a bar, you don't want them to move. You want them to be able to stand in front of that bar and make all the drinks with a meter away, maybe a step if needed. It's the same with tech. You don't want to have to log into 15 different systems to check everything
Yeah.
on your Monday admin day, because then you're spending an hour just logging into things and that's a waste of time. So it's just about how do we integrate, or how do we find a different system that does. So we don't use Slack, but we are looking at different options of the most seamless process, most seamless system that does it.
It is important, though, isn't it? Is that that bit that you just said there about how do you integrate or how do you consolidate? Because I think with all the tech systems that can enable the business to be more efficient, to generate more revenue, all the things that we know tech can do, and I'm a huge believer in tech, so I think it's got a huge part to play. You have to make sure that you're disciplined around that integration or consolidation. Otherwise, you're just going to make it really difficult for your teams, that takes them off the floor and puts them into offices, which is where your GM shouldn't be to really make an impact on the business.
Yeah, well, exactly, right. You want to, I think everybody needs an admin day, do everything, but you don't want them to have two admin days just to be able to filter through everything. And like going back to what I said earlier, it's very much about making the management in the sites have an easier time of it, not a harder time of it, which sometimes does seem to happen when there's so much new tech coming out, especially in hospitality, and a lot of competing systems, and a lot of them do really cool things, but we never used to have that problem. So have you created a problem that we need to solve? Or is this actually a problem that's always been around that needs to be solved? Because the more tech you put in, or the more softwares, the more admin you're putting in is the other bit.
Yeah, that's true. Definitely. I always said that one of the best things that I implemented into a business was Tenzo, because I managed to take 5 systems and people logging in individually into one. And then it used to automatically pump the information back out to people. So actually, I didn't need GMs to log in to see the data, because I could set it to go to them twice a day. And I always said that was one of the game changers that made data really accessible to the GMs, that helped them understand the business better. So it's a really good point that you bring there. So if I let's talk about a little bit more on that project management, and then I want to touch on tech a little bit, but. So if I went and if we sat down and we pulled up your Notion now, like how do you track every single project you're working on there and then manage out from it, or how do you structure Notion in terms of what you do?
In terms of what I do, I mean, we've got, it's quite a hefty Notion. I think it's probably upwards of 20,000 pages now.
Okay.
But we've got a central project hub where projects are created. It's a database. And attached to that is a milestones database. So there's a relation between them. And then there's a relation with tasks as well. So there's 3 databases connected with each other. 4 actually, sorry, there's a meeting ones as well. Now those 4 essentially all feed into the main project. So you'll have a project, and a project can have tasks, it can have milestones, and it can have meetings attached to it. And you could essentially manage that project through that one page, where you can put in all your information. You can link out to a SharePoint, that every site has a SharePoint, every department has a SharePoint. So depending on where it needs to be. And the idea being, again, you don't want to move around too much. You want to be able to just be on that page like you do with your clients, and get all your updates, see where the project's at with milestones, how far are we on the Gantt chart, and whose tasks are outstanding and who needs to do something. So that's kind of how it's set up. We do use Notion for other things as well, which is, I think I mentioned, like a central source of truth. So we've got a wiki, which I think is invaluable because we've got our policies on there, our benefits, paint samples. So if a team on site needs to repaint a waiter station, they don't need to message our design team. They don't need to message the maintenance team. I mean, they will probably still message the maintenance team, but it's all on Notion, so it can be found really quickly. We've got the O&M folder in there, so it's essentially we have all the specs of every site easily accessible. And there's just so much information that used to live everywhere. So there was always a frustration of where is it? Is it in a Teams channel? Is it in a Dropbox? Is it in a SharePoint? Is it in a Google Drive? Is it in a Teams chat? Did you email it to me? So all of that has now been condensed into Notion, or most of it, so that Notion and SharePoint, so that if I'm looking for something, I'll either find it within our central hub of Notion or I'll find it on one of the departmental SharePoints. And just that, I think, has saved people countless hours of having to ask people, because that not only saves you time yourself, because you don't need to wait for people to reply to you, tell you where it is, or resend it to you, but it also saves the other person having to do the same, where it's like, oh, I'm having to send this again for the third time in the last 3 months. So I find that that's really a key bit to Notion, because it also helps with adoption. So you can have a project management software and it's great, but what you really need to do is find multiple avenues for people to use the same system. Like you said with Tenzo, it collates 5 into an email that people receive, which is great. Notion for us does that as well, where we've got project management, but we've also got some reporting on it. So rather than send an email, it gets added to there. We've also got all these policies, benefits. So if somebody wants to know how to do their JKS discount, they check on there. If they need to know whatever it might be, they can search for it. And it's multiple points of logging into the system, looking for things, which means people are more likely to engage with it. So that's kind of how our Notion's set up. So, you've got the project base, but then you've got the wiki base, and then you also have a few other reporting aspects to it.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think it's worth anyone listening to this to just go and check out Notion, because you can actually do quite a bit on the free module. So even if you were, if you were an F&B guy in a hotel and you needed to organize what you were doing a bit more, you can probably go on there pretty much for free, I think, and do it. So just to like going on granular. So we've got the lists, which is where you go in and it's got your 1,000 tasks for an opening. It might be your milestones for a tech implementation, but then you have a page which is your wiki page, which I like how that's phrased, and you might have your policy, and that policy the PDF might sit on the shared drive, but you'd have a link to it from Notion, and your one point of knowledge is to go into Notion, and you can use the search bar to go benefits, and it'd bring up the link that would take you to where it needs to be. That's, I guess, so I just want to break it down into how people might find it easy to implement into their business, and it does make it easy that way, doesn't it? I do one-to-ones on Notion as well. I find it a really good format for that.
It's so flexible. I think that's what's helpful from it. And I'm sure there's other systems than Notion that are as flexible, but it's one of the ones that I found where if you want to have a one-to-one, or you want to have a meeting, or if you want to manage an entire project, you can. It sometimes makes it a bit of too much. You don't know where to start. So it's a good way that you've just explained it, like, so people can be like, oh, now I know where I can kind of structure it, because the hard part is the actual structure of thinking. You could go at so many different multiple ways. So having even an example helps.
Yeah. I mean, this sounds like we probably need to get together and show each other our Notion boards, and
I feel like it, yeah.
Geek out,
I'm really curious
on it, right? Because I run my business cash flow on Notion as well. Because I have my Zero and it's fine, but when you just see it and you type it in sometimes. And I think, all the formulas that you can drive from it and things like that is really quite cool. So yeah, we definitely need to geek out on that for sure.
Definitely. Next time you're around, let's grab a coffee and notionize.
100%. Definitely. So, just to finish up the episode, I guess in terms of, we talked a lot and we've covered quite a bit. We've done the project management bit and talked about the fact that it's a very process driven task and it needs to be quite disciplined. We've talked about change management, which is more about leadership and really helping people to embrace change. And then we've talked about how you can systemize all of that and put it into one place for people to go to. So we've got three big topics that we've covered. If you had to summarize and go how do I stay successful in managing the projects that I'm doing? What would be some of those things that maybe your top 5 that you'd say, if someone's struggling today to keep on top of their projects, these are the 5 things, maybe 5, maybe 3, maybe 2, that you should do and implement tomorrow?
Scope. So for any project, make sure you've got a scope to it, because if you don't, what happens is things go out of scope very quickly and people start asking for a lot more than you can give. So you've got limited resource, which is your time. So make sure you capture everything that needs to be done in that scope, because then it helps you to push back when there's more to be done that potentially will cause an issue for you to deliver the project. Vision. So making sure that any project has a vision at the end, especially on the more adoption projects, tech, of why are we doing it? So the why. Identifying key stakeholders is important, both from project and change. So take an hour, look at everybody that you communicate with in the project and everybody who's going to be affected by it, and just make a little mind map of, should I be checking in with this person more often? Should I go for a coffee with them? Should I invite them to these meetings? That will give you that step back, might be what you need to help you push forward. Because a lot of the time you might realize that you could get a lot more influence from somebody to push something forward if you engage them earlier or in a different way. Where are we at? That's 3 now, right? Learn, as in retrospective, I think is important. With every project I do, I get better, and I make mistakes all the time, and I make sure that I learn from them, right? And 5. What could 5 be? I think communication. So it's a bit related to the stakeholders, but just open communication and transparency. Making sure that you keep everything in a place where people can find it, people know what's going on, status updates. It just helps with keeping everybody on the same page. And it also helps you just review what you've done and notice any holes you might have, like, oh, I haven't completed that, and this is coming up, so now I know I need to flag it. Yeah, I think those would be the 5.
Yeah, no, there's some really good ones in there, and I can't disagree with any of them. I think it's a really good point. And then to cap it all off with a bonus one, I think it's back to that point that you were saying right at the very start, which was, how do you review afterwards as well, isn't it? And go back once it's implemented and work with those stakeholders who are the most important people, which is the user, to to understand that everything's been done as it needs to be. Listen, Brendan, thank you very much for coming on. Really enjoyed this chat.
It's been a pleasure.
We're definitely gonna follow up the Notion bit as well. And listen, if anyone wants to understand what Notion is and how it is and wants to reach out to you, where's the best place to find? LinkedIn or?
Yeah, give me a shout. LinkedIn's always the best. I'll try and reply as quickly as I can. If you're in London, we can grab a coffee. If you need a Teams chat, we can do a Teams call. I'm always happy to give any type of advice especially around Notion, to anybody who needs it.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. And I always talk about how I was really surprised on my journey since I set up my own business of how many times you reach out to people and say, can I just grab your brain for 30 minutes, and how many people actually say yes. So people who are listening to this and struggling with projects and things like that, definitely reach out to Brendan, because what he does at JKS and what JKS does is amazing. So listen, Brendan, thank you very much again for coming on. Really enjoyed it.
Scott, and thanks for having me.
Look forward to meeting for a coffee.
Yeah, definitely. We'll speak soon.
Thank you for listening to Hospitality Huddles. I really hope that you enjoyed this week's episode. And if you did, please leave a review wherever you might listen to your podcasts. It really helps the show, and it's only going to take a couple of minutes. If you don't want to miss a future episode, make sure you hit that subscribe button to get it into your feed as soon as each episode is released. Hospitality Huddles is brought to you by Auden Hospitality, helping hoteliers to think differently to create F&B outlets that their guests will love. Learn more about how we help hotel operations every single day by visiting our website at audenhospitality.com. This has been Hospitality Huddles, where hospitality meets conversation, one huddle at a time. That's all for this week. We'll see you next time.